Today isn't about whether you should have moved. That ship has sailed, the moving truck has been returned, the deposit is long gone. Today is about what you do now that you're here. The 7 things that, in my years talking with retirees who've walked exactly this road, quietly separate the ones who build a rich, rooted, laughing on the porch again, second life, from the ones who, a few years down the line, sit with a very different kind of silence. But first, I want you to know this. You did what you thought was right. You sold the house. You gave away the couch that never quite fit anywhere else, the one your husband insisted on keeping for 11 years past its expiration date. And you said goodbye to neighbors who watched your kids grow from bicycles to braces to college move-out day. You packed 30 years of a life into boxes labeled in your own handwriting, and you moved closer to your son, closer to your daughter, closer to grandbabies you couldn't stand being 1,500 miles away from one more Christmas. And for a while, be honest, it felt like you'd cracked the code, like you'd finally outsmarted loneliness. But here, you and the question that's actually keeping you up isn't, did I make the right decision? It's smaller than that, and somehow heavier. Is this it? Is this just what my life is now? You catch yourself standing in your new kitchen, a kitchen that still doesn't know your habits, that hasn't learned yet which cabinet door sticks, wondering why you feel more alone here, 15 minutes from your son, than you ever did back home, 1,500 miles away from him. Maybe your son's texts have gotten a little shorter. Maybe you've started keeping score without meaning to. Who called who last, who visited last, who's owed a phone call, and you hate that you've become someone who keeps score. But time has a way of turning even the most reasonable person into an accountant of affection. So let me say the thing you actually need to hear before we go any further. You didn't make a mistake. Moving closer to your children was never going to be a magic switch you flip, and suddenly everything clicks into place, warm and effortless, like a Hallmark commercial with better lighting than your actual kitchen. It was always going to be a second beginning. And second beginnings, just like the first one, take work, intention, and, I promise you, a plan. So stay with me. Get comfortable. This one deserves your full attention, and honestly, it deserves a second cup of coffee. 1. Stop waiting for your family to build your life for you. Here's a quiet trap that catches even the most capable, self-sufficient people, the ones who once ran households and departments and PTA fundraisers with military precision. Once you move near your children, it becomes shockingly easy, almost automatic, to let your entire calendar orbit around theirs, like you've quietly signed on as the moon to their planet. You wait to hear about the barbecue. You wait to be invited to Sunday dinner. You wait for your daughter to have a free Saturday so you can finally go see that museum exhibit you've mentioned 4 separate times, hoping it lands as a hint. And weeks go by, then months, and one day you realize you've been waiting by the phone like it's 1974, and you're hoping the boy from chemistry class calls. Your children love you, but they are not responsible for filling your days, and if you quietly hand them that responsibility, even without meaning to, 2 things happen at once. You become smaller in your own life, and this is the part almost nobody expects. You become heavier in theirs. Adult children can feel it when a parent's happiness has quietly become their job. It doesn't land as love received. It lands as a weight added to an already overloaded truck. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Ruth, because her story is the reality that so many of you have quietly been living. Ruth was 71 when she moved from a small town in Ohio to a suburb outside Denver, 3 miles from her son Ben and his family. She'd lived in that Ohio house for 34 years. Long enough that she knew the mail carrier's name, his dog's name, and roughly what day he'd complain about his knees. She knew which pew was hers at church, even though nobody had ever officially assigned it to her. The congregation simply understood, the way small towns understand things, that Ruth sat 3rd row, left side, and God help the visitor who didn't know better. She moved because Ben asked her to, gently, after her second fall in 6 months. "Mom, I can't keep getting a call from 3 states away and not being able to do anything for 4 hours," he told her. And she understood. She really did. Nobody wants to be the reason their child lies awake at 2:14 a.m. doing frantic math about flight times. The first month in Denver was full of little triumphs, the kind that feel enormous when you're starting over. She unpacked her books. She found a grocery store that carried her brand of tea. She had dinner with Ben's family 3 times in 10 days. And it felt, she told me later, like winning something I didn't know I'd lost. But by month 4, the visits had quietly dropped to once a week. By month 6, Ruth was spending most of her days in a townhouse she still hadn't fully decorated, because putting art on the walls felt like admitting this was permanent, and some part of her wasn't ready to sign that particular lease with her own heart yet. Do this now. This week, pick one thing: a class, a volunteer role, a walking group, a book club, ballroom dancing, competitive Scrabble. It truly does not matter. That has absolutely nothing to do with your children, and sign up. Not someday. This week. Independence at this stage of life isn't something you protect by staying distant from your family. It's something you build, brick by brick, in the space that belongs entirely to you. 2. Name the unspoken expectations out loud. Almost every tension I hear about between retirees and their adult children after a move traces back to the exact same root cause. 2 people carrying 2 completely different, unspoken pictures of what living closer was supposed to look like. Like they each ordered a different item off a menu, neither of them actually read out loud. You may have imagined Sunday dinners, spontaneous coffee visits, being woven into the daily fabric of your grandchildren's lives like a favorite, well-worn quilt. Your son or daughter may have imagined something far more modest, knowing you're nearby for emergencies, seeing you every couple of weeks, having peace of mind, rather than a daily obligation stacked on top of a full-time job and 2 kids in soccer cleats. Neither picture is wrong. But if they're never spoken aloud, both of you quietly measure the relationship against a private, invisible ruler. And both of you quietly, silently, come up short against a standard the other person never actually agreed to. I think of a man named Walter, who moved near his daughter Patricia after his wife passed. Walter assumed, without ever saying it, that he'd be picking his grandson up from school most days. That felt to him like the natural, obvious use of finally being close by. Patricia assumed, equally without saying it, that Walter needed rest and space after his loss, and quietly arranged after-school care elsewhere so as not to burden him. Walter spent 6 weeks feeling gently, invisibly shut out of his own grandson's life. Patricia spent 6 weeks feeling like she was doing her grieving father a kindness. Neither one knew the other's story, until Walter finally, awkwardly, over a pot roast neither of them was really tasting, said, "I thought I'd be more involved than this." And Patricia, genuinely stunned, said, "I thought I was protecting you." 1 sentence. 6 weeks of silent hurt on both sides, dissolved by 1 sentence that could have been said on day 1. Do this now. Have or repeat the direct conversation, not about logistics, about expectations. How often do you actually want to see each other? What does involved mean to each of you, specifically in actual hours and actual Tuesdays? What does each of you need? And what can each of you realistically give without resentment quietly composting underneath the surface? This conversation will feel a little awkward, maybe even a little confrontational for a family that doesn't usually talk this directly. Have it anyway. Awkward and honest beats warm and unspoken every single time. 3. Treat your social life like a project, not an accident. Here is the paradox that catches nearly everyone off guard. The number one reason most retirees move closer to their kids is to escape loneliness. And without a real plan, the number one thing that actually happens is that they become more isolated, not less. It's like moving to the beach to cure your fear of water. Back home, your social life wasn't something you consciously engineered. It accumulated slowly, almost invisibly, over 20 or 30 years. The neighbor who waved every single morning without fail, the church group, the friend who just showed up with coffee and a look on her face that said, "I heard, and I'm here." None of that transfers with the moving truck. It doesn't fit in a box, no matter how good you are at packing. Your children, no matter how much they love you, cannot be your entire peer group. They're a different generation, living a different, far busier life, and expecting them to fill the role your old community used to fill will leave both of you exhausted, resentful, and disappointed in a relationship that was never designed to carry that particular weight. This is not something that gets better by accident. It gets better by design. Deliberate, sometimes uncomfortable, occasionally embarrassing design. Do this now. Make a list, an actual physical list, pen and paper, not just a thought you had in the shower, of the anchors that made your old life feel connected, the groups, the routines, the weekly rituals. Then go find the closest equivalent in your new town, even an imperfect one. A senior center, a faith community, a gym class full of people complaining about the same knees you complain about, a volunteer shift at the library. The goal isn't to replace what you had overnight. That's not possible. And expecting it of yourself is just setting up another disappointment. The goal is to plant enough seeds that a year from now, you have a life that doesn't depend on your children showing up to keep you from feeling alone. And I want to say this next part plainly, because it deserves more than a gentle aside. The research on this is not soft or vague. Long-term isolation in older adults is linked to real, measurable declines in memory, mood, and physical health. This isn't a nice-to-have, a pleasant little hobby suggestion tucked at the end of a video. Rebuilding a social circle is one of the single most protective things you can do for your mind and body at this stage of your life. Treat it with the seriousness you'd give a diagnosis, because in a very real sense, its absence functions like one. 4. Build a safety plan that doesn't depend entirely on your kids. Here's something I've noticed, and it always catches people off guard when I say it out loud. People move closer to their children specifically for safety, for the reassurance that someone will be nearby if something goes wrong. And then a striking number of them never actually build a real safety plan. They just quietly assume that proximity itself is the plan, the way some people assume owning a smoke detector means they've fireproofed the house. But your son living 12 minutes away doesn't mean he's always reachable. He has a job, a commute, a phone that's on silent during a 2-hour meeting about quarterly projections while you're on the kitchen floor, wondering how long 12 minutes actually feels like when you're the one waiting. Real safety, the kind that actually protects you, is layered. It includes your children. Absolutely. but it never relies on them alone because that's not fair to you, and honestly, it's not fair to them either. Do this now, concretely, this week, not eventually. Find a doctor and set up your first appointment before you need one urgently, not after urgent care. Waiting rooms are a terrible place to be meeting your new physician for the first time. Know where the nearest emergency room is, and exactly how you'd get there if your child isn't available in the moment. Look into a medical alert system if you live alone, regardless of how nearby family is. Think of it less as admitting frailty and more as hiring backup, the way any smart executive builds a team instead of doing everything solo. Introduce yourself to at least one or two neighbors, so there's a second and third set of eyes on your daily rhythm besides your children, someone who notices if your curtains haven't opened by 10. Write down your medications, your conditions, your emergency contacts, and keep a copy somewhere your children and that neighbor both know about. None of this is about expecting disaster around every corner. It's about making sure the peace of mind you moved here to find is actually real, built, tested, and dependable, and not just a feeling you've been quietly borrowing from your children's general presence in the same zip code without ever confirming it with an actual plan. 5. Let yourself grieve what you left behind. Here's something almost nobody says out loud, and it desperately needs to be said. It is completely normal, completely healthy, entirely allowed to miss your old life, even though you're genuinely glad to be near your children. These two feelings are not enemies, fighting for the same territory in your chest. They're roommates. Slightly awkward roommates maybe, but roommates nonetheless. You can love being closer to your grandkids and still grieve the garden you tended for 2 decades, the one where you knew exactly which corner got afternoon sun. You can be grateful for Sunday dinners and still ache, quietly, for the friend who used to show up unannounced with cookies and absolutely no agenda. Both things can be true in the same afternoon, sometimes in the same hour. The danger was never in feeling the loss. The danger is in refusing to feel it, pushing it down, because some part of you is terrified that admitting sadness means admitting you made the wrong choice. But grief doesn't work like a bill you can simply decline to pay. It doesn't vanish because you've ignored the invoice. Unprocessed grief resurfaces later, usually wearing a disguise, as irritability, as unexplained distance from the very family you moved to be near, as a quiet resentment that has no clear target and therefore lands on whoever happens to be standing closest, which is usually the people you love most. Do this now. Actually name what you miss. Say it out loud to someone, or write it down where no one's watching. The porch, the neighbor, the church pew that was somehow always yours. The predictable rhythm of a life you spent decades building, one Tuesday at a time. Let it be sad without letting it become a courtroom verdict on your decision. Grief acknowledged tends to move through you, like weather. Grief denied tends to move into you and unpack its bags and stay. 6. Renegotiate your role. Don't let helpful become invisible. There's a particular trap that catches people who move closer, specifically to help with grandchildren, and it deserves its own spotlight here because it rarely announces itself. It starts beautifully. You're needed. You're useful. You're picking kids up from school, making dinner on chaotic weeknights, being the steady, capable hands that keep a busy household from tipping over entirely. It feels wonderful, especially after a lifetime of caregiving. It's a role you already know how to play, and you play it well, maybe better than anyone else in the house. But slowly, quietly. For some people, helpful grandparent starts to replace every other part of who they are, the way one dominant plant will eventually choke out an entire garden bed if nobody thins it back. The conversations become only about logistics, who's picking up whom, what's for dinner, whether the permission slip got signed. The visits from friends taper off because there's simply no time. And one day, months or years in, you catch your own reflection, and you're genuinely not sure when you became only a function in someone else's household, instead of a whole, textured, funny, opinionated person your family actually relates to. Do this now. Periodically, maybe every few months, put a reminder on the calendar if you have to. Ask yourself honestly, when my family and I talk, do we talk about anything other than logistics? Do my grandchildren know things about me, my actual history, my opinions, my sense of humor, the things I loved before I was anyone's grandmother at all? Or do they only know me as the person who shows up and manages things? If the answer has quietly drifted toward just logistics, it's worth having a gentle conversation with your children about carving out time that isn't about tasks at all. Helping your family and disappearing into your family are two entirely different things, and the line between them is thinner and easier to cross than almost anyone expects going in. 7. Build a plan B, because nothing in life is permanent. I'll say this as gently and as clearly as I know how. The reason you moved might not stay the same forever, and that is not a pessimistic thing to say out loud. It's simply true. The way weather changes, the way seasons turn, whether or not we've finished enjoying the last one. Jobs relocate, marriages end, grandchildren grow up, get their license, and leave for college in some city you never planned to follow them to. Have talked with more people than I can count who moved for family, only to have that family's circumstances shift a few years later, leaving them in an unfamiliar place at a higher cost of living, with a social network they hadn't quite finished building, holding a moving box they thought they'd unpacked for the last time. This isn't meant to frighten you. It's meant to protect you the way a good insurance policy protects you, not because you expect the worst, but because hoping for the best has never actually been a plan. Do this now. Ask yourself honestly, if my children were no longer in this city, would I still choose to live here? Would the community I've built, the doctor I've found, the friends I've made, still make this a good home for me on its own merits, independent of any one person's zip code? If the answer is yes, wonderful. You've built something sturdy enough to hold up no matter what life does next, and that's no small accomplishment. If the answer is no, that's important information too. And it doesn't mean you made a mistake. It means it's worth keeping your roots here a little looser, your options a little more open, your sense of self a little less tied to a single reason for being where you are. The families who navigate this best aren't the ones who assume nothing will ever change. They're the ones who build a life sturdy enough to survive change, should it ever come knocking. If you've already moved closer to your children, you haven't missed your chance to get this right. That chance is still right here, today, in whichever one of these 7 things you haven't done yet. Pick one, just one, and start this week. Not someday, not after the holidays. This week. If this video spoke to something you've been feeling, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which of these 7 is the one you most need to start with? I read every single comment, and I know so many of you are living this exact story right now, wide awake, wondering if it's just you. It isn't. If it helped, consider giving it a like and sharing it with someone you know who's made this same move and might need to hear it too. Sometimes the kindest thing you can send someone isn't advice. It's proof they're not alone. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.